Hello and welcome to today's Take, hosted by me, Jane Azzopardi, the podcast that takes you beyond the headlines and gives you the story behind the story that you see on TV. And this week, Erin Patterson, the infamous mushroom murderer, finally learned just how long she'll spend in jail for her crimes.
Erin Patterson, as you just saw, has arrived here at the Victorian Supreme Court. Once again, there has been quite a bit of security. The Protective Service officers here just making sure everything is okay, and look at the amount of media that is here for the triple murderer to find out how long she will be behind prison. This is her sentencing, which will be happening in about half an hour's time.
For the attempted murder of Ian Wilkinson, I sentence you to 25 years imprisonment. For the murder of Heather Wilkinson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Gail Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. For the murder of Don Patterson, I sentence you to life imprisonment. All sentences are to be served concurrently. The total effective sentence is life imprisonment, and I fix a non-parole period of 33 years.
Our lives and the life of our community depends on the kindness of others. I'd like to encourage everybody to be kind to each other.
Well, one of the journalists who has covered this story and trial since the very beginning and knows this case absolutely inside out is 9 Melbourne court reporter Amber Johnston, and I'm pleased to say she joins me now. Amber, welcome to today's Take.
Good morning, Jane. Thank you for having me.
Well, after so long, I mean, we've all been engrossed in this case, but probably no one more than you and your other fellow court reporters. How do you feel now it's all over?
Well, to be completely honest, it's a really strange feeling. I wasn't too sure how I was going to feel once we got to the end of the sentencing, but it really was a strange sense of relief, and that makes me think I can only imagine how the families are feeling if that's how we're feeling as members of the media. It was just such a huge monster of a case. It ended up being so much longer than we ever would have expected. It was also incredibly heavy, obviously hearing all of the evidence and those allegations against Erin Patterson, which we now know she's been, she's a convicted triple murderer. It was a really high pressure trial to cover, high stakes, and feeling a weird sense of relief. But I do wonder whether the families feel like the sentencing on Monday, if there is a sense of closure, or I don't know if that, after something so heinous, whether they could ever feel, closure after something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, there is so much to talk about in this case, but let's get to that day of sentencing, which is something that so many people, none more so than the families involved, as you mentioned, had been waiting for. Take us inside the courtroom that day. What was the atmosphere like? What was it like in there?
It was really quite tense compared to what it was like in Morwell, for instance. So there were days in Morwell during the trial, where the trial was held, this small town in regional Victoria, where there were tense days when Erin Patterson took the witness box. You could really feel this uptight energy, and it was very similar during sentencing on Monday, and it was a lot more formal because when we were down in Morwell, it ended up being 3 months we were down there, and we were, we'd become friends with the security guards at the court. It was a lot more of a relaxed kind of feeling in the courtroom, I guess. Whereas during the sentencing, it was a lot more serious. It was full to the brim, this courtroom. I've never seen anything like it before. There were members of the public lining up, about 60 people lining up at the front of the Supreme Court from 7 a.m. in the morning, all fighting to get a seat inside. So, it was a really tense feeling, and also just this anticipation, I guess, for, whatever the result was going to be. We really had no idea what way Justice Christopher Beale was going to go, and you could really feel that. It was also quite strange to observe Erin Patterson in the courtroom as well, because, again, she is a woman who has shown very little emotion throughout all of this, and that was the same during sentencing.
Well, this was, I believe, the first time that a camera has been allowed into a Victorian courtroom for a sentencing, but the rule was that the camera could only be focused on the judge. So those of us who were watching it on TV or on a live stream couldn't actually see how or if Erin Patterson reacted to any of it. I want to get to what Justice Beale had to say in a moment, but you were able to watch Erin Patterson during that sentencing process. Did she react at all?
It's been so fascinating observing Erin Patterson in court. We've seen a complete range of emotions from her during the trial. And I honestly thought that during sentencing, that might be the time where we do see her, break down or show a glimmer of remorse, I guess, because it's really the end of the line for her. But it was really quite strange because there was nothing from her, no emotion. She was stone cold. She was closing her eyes for long periods, sometimes up to 10 minutes at a time. And the only moment where she seemed to be a little bit more alert was when Justice Christopher Beale was referencing Pastor Ian Wilkinson, the sole surviving guest of the lunch. She did open her eyes and appeared to be listening and quite engaged. But besides that, honestly, no real reaction. And the only other thing I noticed is that once she'd been handed her sentence and she was being led out of the courtroom by those prison guards, she seemed to be a little bit uneasy on her feet and she was kind of gripping onto the wall a little bit as she was being walked out. And she also looks like a shadow of her former self. You might remember those prison van shots, those incredible pictures. She is quite dishevelled, her hair was quite matted, so she does look very, very different compared to how we saw her during the trial.
Justice Beale went into some detail about what conditions are like for her in jail. I'll get to that in a moment, but because he also went through the case in detail, spoke about a lot of things, including the suffering that her victims went through. You sat through the whole trial, and then so you've heard all of the evidence before, but then hearing him sum up the case, what stood out the most to you, do you think?
I think the main points that stuck with me were when Justice Christopher Beale basically confirmed what we were all wondering. He confirmed, because I guess at the end of the trial, you get the jury's verdicts, guilty, not guilty, but then we don't really know the details of how they got to that result. But then hearing from Justice Christopher Beale, hearing him confirm that she faked her cancer diagnosis, that it was all a bit of a ploy to lure her in-laws to that lunch. The fact that he confirmed she never fed those leftovers to her children and she never ate the meal herself. Hearing him confirm all of those details just kind of solidified everything that we'd been wondering for so long now, and that really stood out to me. And another interesting point he made, which was quite chilling in a way, is that no motive has ever been established. And he looked directly at Erin Patterson as he said to her, "You are the only person who knows why you chose this horrific path, at least for now. Who knows if that will change in the future." But that has been a really huge aspect of this case, because I think when we look at how heinous and how cruel and evil this crime is, we try to make some sort of sense of it, I guess, but there's never been any sort of motive behind her horrific actions.
He also really spoke about her lack of remorse and how that continued to the point where, she knew her victims were in hospital and needing treatment, and she continued to lie about foraging for mushrooms. And he pointed out, that if she'd said that, maybe they could have used a particular antidote. It's really incredible.
Yeah, I think the words Justice Beale used was senseless. What just a cruel way to treat these people who were nothing but beautiful and good to her. She had multiple opportunities after the lunch to confess and to help them. And there is a medication that can be used if someone has ingested death cap mushrooms to help improve their survival rates. But the problem is, because she didn't give up any of this information, she was still, putting on this persona that she was a victim in all this. She was in a similar boat to them. She was faking her symptoms. That medication wasn't given to the lunch guests until it was too late. I mean, obviously we know that Pastor Ian Wilkinson, he survived, but when you hear the evidence from all of the medical experts, they say that man should not be here today. It's an absolute miracle that he survived that. And we know that it was obviously a very different, tragic outcome for the other lunch guests. So, there were council workers, staff from the health department speaking directly with Erin Patterson, asking her, where did you get these mushrooms? Where did you source them? And she just embarked on this incredibly evil cover-up where she pretended that she got these mushrooms from a grocer. She was really vague about the details and never helped once.
Well, I mean, if you look at how, I mean, I don't want to use the word karma, it's probably not the best word to use in this situation, but when you look at the detail of how her life is panning out now, she is at least paying some of the price for that. One of the things that stood out to me from that sentencing was when Justice Beale started to detail what her life is like in prison, because we hear this phrase solitary confinement and it's hard to imagine just exactly what it means, but he really did paint a picture of what everyday life is like for her. Talk us through, you know, what her day-to-day is like now.
That's such a good point. I think when we hear these cases, you hear the word solitary confinement and that's kind of it. But Justice Christopher Beale went into very vivid detail, as did Erin Patterson's defence barrister, because that was one of the arguments her legal team was using to try and mitigate her sentence, I guess. So we learnt that because of all of the interest around the case and her notoriety, because of just how big this story has become, she's been deemed a high-risk inmate. And we know that in early 2024, there were threats against her at the Dame Phyllis Frost Centre where she's being held. So as a result, for her own safety, she has basically been put into a protective unit. And that's where she has spent the best part of 15 months off the top of my head. And to paint a picture of what that looks like, she's basically locked away in this tiny cell for minimum 22 hours a day, and we heard that sometimes it's been up to 24 hours a day when there's been staff shortages or lockdowns at the jail. She has access to one tiny little courtyard, but she can only access that courtyard when none of the other inmates in that protective unit are there. So I think there's about 20 rooms in total. So she has literally no contact with anyone else. The only other inmate she has permission to interact with is a terrorist who has a history of attacking other inmates. And we learned in court that Erin Patterson hasn't engaged with this person. She hasn't been in communication with her. So to be completely frank, it's an incredibly grim existence. And we also learnt that during her time in prison, she has access to a hair straightener, she has a laptop that she can use, and also she's picked up crocheting as a hobby, I guess, to pass the time. But it would just be a horrific existence. And then compare that to the life she was living before these heinous crimes. She was living in this beautiful home in regional Victoria with her children. It is a complete stark contrast, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't think there would be anybody who says she doesn't deserve exactly what she's brought upon herself. But to hear it spelled out, you know, her meals coming through a flap in the door and she's barely even been able to access to the library. It is a grim existence. And the judge also said, you know, because of her notoriety, it's going to be like this for the foreseeable future. And she is going to be in jail until she is at least 82 years old.
Yeah, so when we were heading into sentencing, we knew that Erin Patterson was going to get a life sentence because everyone agreed, given how evil these crimes are, that's what she deserves. She deserves a life sentence. But the argument was whether they were going to set a non-parole period. So we were really on the edge of our seats waiting to see what Justice Christopher Beale was going to do. And there is so much he needs to consider when making these decisions. And one of those considerations are the conditions in which a inmate is serving their time. And in the end, he ruled that obviously her time in jail is going to be a bit more onerous given those really harsh conditions. And that's why he ended up setting that non-parole period of 33 years. So it means Erin Patterson needs to serve 33 years before she's eligible for parole. That takes her to the age of 82. It also means that her kids, who are still literally kids at this stage, before she was taken into custody, they were her children who she was kissing goodnight and tucking into bed. said, they're going to be in their 40s when she's eligible for release, which I think really puts everything into perspective, doesn't it?
Yeah, and the suffering she's brought upon those children as well, through her actions, taking away their grandparents and effectively taking away their mother as well. I was also really struck, Amber, by Ian Wilkinson's words outside of the court, a man who has been through so much, using that opportunity to talk about kindness.
He is such an incredible individual, and he has shown that from woe to go. Even when he was giving his evidence during the trial, he was just so composed and handled the whole situation with so much grace. He was never someone who came out, you know, attacking Erin Patterson or being, you know, showing any sort of glimmer of anger or anything like that. He was very matter of fact when he was giving his evidence, and then during his incredibly powerful victim impact statement, he was just so eloquent and spoke so beautifully about his wife Heather. And then we were all waiting to see after the sentence, was he going to come out and make a statement? And he did. So he, everyone gathered at the steps of the Supreme Court, and he used that opportunity to not only thank the police officers and the legal team who have helped bring him and his family justice, but he delivered a message saying, I want everyone to remember to be kind to each other. I mean, he was in court, sat just meters away from Erin Patterson. I can't even imagine how difficult that must have been for him. And still he has come out with no vengeance, nothing like that. He's just been incredibly brave and strong and delivered this really beautiful message. And also, he's also said, I really hope that Erin can turn her life around. And we know that there was that moment during the plea hearing where he offered his forgiveness to Erin Patterson. I mean, what a courageous man to do something like that.
It is hard to imagine being able to forgive somebody who had inflicted that level of pain and suffering upon you and your loved ones, but he really is kind of embodying the aspects of human kindness that he talks about.
I think his faith has a lot to do with this. So he's a Baptist church at the Currumbara, a pastor at the Currumbara Church, and a huge influential member of the community there. And I think his sermons at the church would often talk about forgiveness. And I think that has really been reflected in how he's handled this whole situation. I think there would be a lot of us who would feel very differently and would act very differently when someone you thought you could trust has betrayed you in the most cruel way. I don't know if I would have handled that situation with as much grace as he has, but I do think his faith and the beautiful community that he has, that he's surrounded by, has really influenced that. And honestly, he's just a very lovely, beautiful, down-to-earth person, and that has been reflected throughout this whole process.
Yeah, really powerful hearing him deliver that message of forgiveness and kindness. Let's talk about Simon Patterson now, Erin's estranged former husband. We haven't really heard a lot from him, but that could be about to change.
Yes, we know from Simon Patterson, he has found this whole process incredibly overwhelming, which is completely understandable. He has had so many offers to speak and share his side of the story, because I think everyone wants to know, I mean, what were the red flags? Were there any red flags? What's his take on all of this? Besides when he gave evidence during the trial, he has never spoken. So we've never heard his side of the story, but we've just found out that he's doing a tell-all podcast. So this is something that he's doing himself. He's engaged his own team, I guess, to produce this podcast. And I believe it's planned to be released by the end of the year. And then the transcript from that podcast is going to be turned into a memoir and a book as well, which will just be so fascinating to hear his take. And I think for Simon, he must feel like so much of this process has been taken out of his control. And he probably wants to relinquish some of that, I guess, and be able to tell his story in his words on his terms. So I think that has been his reasoning as to why he's taken this path. But it will be fascinating to hear what he has to say.
Oh, it absolutely will. I can already predict there'll be lots of people listening to that podcast. So he is going to take the opportunity to tell his side of the story. One person who, even though she gave evidence, we really still know very little about is Erin Patterson herself. And Justice Beale even pointed to that in his sentencing, that there really wasn't a whole lot he could say about her personality or her motives.
Yeah, we were all waiting during the plea hearing. That's sometimes an opportunity where a defence team might present a psych report or some sort of medical report that would basically identify any sort of mental illnesses, whatever they might be, to explain the behaviour. And it can also work to be a bit of a mitigating factor before sentencing as well. But that did not happen in this case. And it also means that we've now had no insight into Erin Patterson's mind. We're all trying to make sense as to why this country mum would turn on her family who she claimed to love and why she killed them. And we've never had any insight. Also, she's never offered any remorse, any confession, any sort of explanation. So there's a huge big question mark over that part of the story. And who knows if we'll ever find out.
We know she has about 27 days, I think it was, in order to lodge an appeal. Has there been any indication about whether she will do that?
Not yet. So it's normally 28 days from sentencing that her and her legal team have to lodge an appeal. So we'll just have to wait and see. Speaking to a bunch of different experts, I've had mixed reactions. Some have said it's a no-brainer that she will try and fight this because she's a woman who comes from a whole lot of money. She has a very good defence team, one of the best defence barristers in Victoria. And also she has nothing to lose. She's staring down the barrel of at least 33 years behind bars, so why wouldn't she? But then on the other side of the coin, she basically needs to prove that there was some sort of miscarriage of justice or that she's been hard done by, that the sentence was manifestly excessive. And that might have been the case if she was sentenced to life without parole. So there's also been a lot of commentary around whether maybe that's why Justice Christopher Beale did set that parole period, because it limits her opportunity to try and appeal. So it'll be really interesting to see. So the other point to make as well is that the way Justice Christopher Beale carried out this trial, a lot of people were basically calling it appeal-proof because he was so meticulous. That's why, one of the reasons why the trial ended up taking as long as it did. It was only set aside for 5 to 6 weeks. It ended up being 3 months. We were down in Morwell, and he was just crossing every T, dotting every I, making sure everything was above board. So I'm not sure what grounds she could possibly appeal on, to be completely honest.
Yeah, well, the one thing that everybody is wondering, of course, is why she did it. We did an earlier podcast on Today's Take with Dr. Xanthi Mallet, a criminologist, who said, because she hadn't been examined by a psychologist, there was no psychology report. It made kind of trying to determine that motive even more difficult. And we didn't even get that kind of report at the sentencing. So really, everybody's just kind of, I don't know, trying to draw their own conclusions here as to why she did it.
And I think that's only natural as well. So many people have been so invested in this case because of how horrific the crimes are and how bizarre this story has been. Yeah. And I think we do try to make sense of it, I guess. I don't know if that's the right way to frame it, make sense of it, but you're trying to reconcile why this person would do something so horrific to her own family and, to her children, it's her grandparents, it's her estranged husband. And this is just my opinion, after sitting through the trial, the closest thing to a motive I thought was obviously the fractures in her relationship with Simon Patterson. The fact that we knew that there was a lot of disputes over child payments, what school the children were going to. Their relationship really broke down towards the end, and that's when some of this behaviour started. And we know, of course, these were charges that were dropped, but police also accused Erin Patterson of trying to murder her estranged husband Simon on at least 3 other occasions. Now, those charges never went to trial, so they are just allegations. But it does make you wonder, was Simon the intended target in all of this? And were his family, were they just collateral damage? Because she was trying to get him to the lunch. He was invited to the lunch and he ended up saying, I don't feel comfortable coming. We know that she had an extra beef Wellington parcel that if Simon had attended, she was going to feed it to him. But his parents were nothing but good to her, and she didn't really know Ian Wilkinson or Heather Wilkinson. They'd never been to her house before. So why she targeted them is just so hard to try and make sense of.
Oh, absolutely. And I can imagine you and the other court reporters who spent sort of 2 to 3 months there in Morwell would have been kind of trying to nut this out between yourselves over many a dinner at the time. Do you think after all of that, I mean, it sort of feels like it's come to a conclusion, but there's not really an answer to any of it?
Yeah, as we were talking about earlier at the start of our chat, it's the question of closure. I mean, I was surprised to feel such a big sense of relief, and I almost feel guilty saying that because I'm just such a small, tiny piece of this whole experience. It hasn't... I'm not really part of this.
You're a reporter,
story.
You're not, a participant. Yeah, I get it.
Yeah, and it's almost like, it feels weird to say that, but it just was so all-consuming. We all became so invested in these people's lives, and we really felt the full weight of how extraordinary this case was. And it was high pressure. There were a lot of potential legal ramifications and so much at stake for people like Pastor Ian Wilkinson, who we ended up, getting to know quite well. So, yeah, I just felt this huge wave of relief, but I don't know how the family would feel. I guess there would be some sort of sense of justice in a way, but whether they feel closure, I don't know how you ever recover from something like that. Just the betrayal runs so deep. The fact that these people are gone forever. Ian, in his victim impact statement, was giving horrific details about what life is like now without his wife, Heather. I don't know how you move forward from that, to be completely honest.
And no answer to the question of why, which is probably what a lot of people want in a situation like this. Amber, thank you so much for joining us. I know, this has consumed a lot of your life. I don't think it's going anywhere soon. We'll hear from Simon Patterson's podcast, and undoubtedly there will be telemovies and series, and it's just a story that has grabbed the world's attention.
It absolutely has. Even I know this Sunday there's a Stan documentary that's about to be released. So I think we're going to be hearing about this case for a long time.
We absolutely are. Amber, thank you so much for joining us here on Today's Take.
Thank you for having me.
And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed our chat, please do give us a rating, leave a comment, take a listen to some of our previous episodes because it all helps. We will be back next week with another episode of Today's Take. Until then, I'll see you bright and early with the rest of the Today team. Have a great day.